Hi everyone, and welcome to our fourth video cast for the Biopsych unit. And in this video cast, we're going to be talking about the brain, which is the coolest organ in your entire body because it does the most things, and at the end of the day is basically responsible for every single thing that you do, right? So in psychology, like, why do we study the brain? Psychology is not in the science department, it's in the social studies department. Well, guess what? Psychology is the study of human behavior and human thought. Well, guess what? All your behavior and all your thoughts are controlled by your brain, except your reflexes, which is the only behavior that happens in your spinal cord, okay? So here's the deal, right? The brain is by far the most important organ in your body. Okay, how do you study the brain? There's a couple different ways. The first way you can do it is something called an EEG. An EEG just studies electrical, it's this guy right here, and it studies electrical activity in the brain, okay? It measures, like, when you're, like different sleep cycles, different times of the night, you have different electric activity in your brain, okay? The next one we have right there, this is the CT scan, and it's like an X-ray. It measures, it like looks at the structure of your brain, so if you have a concussion or other things, that's what you might use. The one down here is something called a PET scan, okay? A PET scan is something that uses, you like basically use something called radioactive glucose, and it looks at your blood glucose levels inside of your brain. So it looks like how the blood glucose flows or glows in the brain based on how much sugar the brain is kind of digesting and using. And sugar is really energy, so where the brain is using energy, you can then see where it's working. Okay, you can also use an MRI, right? An MRI is this guy over here. It's like a big magnet, okay? And it's kind of like a CT scan where it measures the structure of the brain, but it gives you a much more detailed picture. We can actually see a lot more in an MRI than you ever could in a CT scan, okay? It really looks not at just the skeletal muscle, but at the soft tissue of the brain. And some things that we found from an MRI is that people who have schizophrenia, they have like big fluid-filled sacs in their brain, and musicians tend to have a bigger left hemisphere than a right hemisphere because the left hemisphere is, they use it maybe more for movement or whatever. Okay, so then you have your fMRI, and your fMRI is kind of like a PET scan, but even better. Okay, it deals again with blood flow and blood function, and we can like look at an fMRI and tell what you're thinking when you're thinking, those kinds of things. It like parts of your brain light up depending on what you're looking at or what you're thinking or what you're moving. Okay. All right, so the brain is really cool because it has this thing called plasticity, and I've already mentioned this a little bit, right? So when you're born, you have all the neurons you're ever going to have in your entire life. Okay, then you don't gain any more neurons. But what you do gain is connections between the neurons. So what happens is that after you're born, the number of dendrites and synapses that or the connections between them keep growing and growing. That's why infants, can't walk or those kinds of things, because those neural connections aren't strong enough yet. They're still growing. And so when they finish growing, that's when the baby then can start doing things like walking, talking, whatever. Okay, now, the thing about it is that no matter what happens, even if you lose some of these synapses or some of these dendrites, your brain is plastic, which means it basically can regrow itself to take over the responsibilities of the stuff that got, put away for whatever reason. So this girl right here, this is her picture of her brain, right? And in her brain, you see that this half is missing, and that's because she had seizures on this half. She had seizures on this half, and they were spreading to this half. So they took this half out so she wouldn't have seizures anymore. Well, of course, when this half is gone, that's half her brain, right? So this half literally started taking over the function for this side. Within something like 10 days, she was able to walk out of the hospital, okay? Of course, the younger you are, the better this is. If you're really young, it's going to grow much quicker and much better, regrow, than if you're older, not so much. Okay, so what does the brain look like? What are the actual structures? Okay, if this was me, I would try to copy down these visuals as best as I can because you're going to need them for the brain surgery we're doing tomorrow in class. So the oldest part of your brain is called the hindbrain, and this is the oldest part because it's like present in almost all mammals, reptiles, animals, whatever. Everyone has it, and it controls basic functions that everyone needs. Okay, it connects the spinal cord with the rest of the brain, so it's right at the base here, okay, the neck, and one of the most important parts is the brainstem. The brainstem is a couple of separate parts, right? So the first part of the brainstem is the medulla, okay? You see the medulla here is kind of in the middle, all right? It's right there, and it controls autonomic functions like heart rate and breathing, and it also controls reflexes from your cranial nerve. So it controls coughing, sneezing, and vomiting. So those facial reflexes are actually not in your spinal column, but in your medulla, okay? The next part that I want you to know about is called the pons. The pons is right up on top here, okay? And the pons connects the brainstem and the cerebellum, okay? That's right here. I'll talk about what that does in a minute. And it also controls sleep and arousal, okay? Now, the reticular formation is down inside of the brainstem. You see it's like, so this is the brainstem, the reticular formation is actually in the side of it, and it's like a mesh network. It kind of looks like a cross wires like this, and it regulates sleep and arousal just like the pons does. Okay, a lot of times people talk about the reticular formation and the pons as one thing. They are separate, but a lot of times they go together because they have very similar functions. Now remember, this arousal here is not like sexual arousal, but like sleep arousal. So like, am I tired, or am I awake and alive, right? That kind of arousal. Okay, last but not least is your cerebellum, okay? Your cerebellum is also known as your little brain because it's right back here at the bottom of the brainstem, okay? And it controls your balance. So there's one animal that has a really large cerebellum because they have a really good balance. Can you think of what it is? They always land on their legs. That's right, it's a cat. So cats have a very large cerebellum compared to humans because they have such great balance. Okay, your cerebellum also controls all your fine motor movements, so like moving your fingers in a certain way, or like, you know, very skilled kind of movement, you know, the back and forth movement maybe of like kicking a soccer ball or those kinds of things. And remember, this is where your procedural, your memory of how to do things is stored, which of course makes sense now because your motor movement is how you do it, right? You move it by moving your hands or moving your feet or those kinds of things. Okay, so the next part of the brain that I want to talk about kind of moves inside of the brain, okay? And this is the limbic system. The limbic system is involved in emotion, motivation, and memory, okay? The limbic system isn't quite as clear as, say, the brainstem. People kind of argue about what is and is not in the limbic system. So some people don't believe the thalamus actually is in the limbic system, but for our purposes, just say it is, okay? The thalamus kind of sits right on top here. So this is the brainstem, right? And it kind of goes right up through there, and the thalamus is on the top. Okay, the thalamus is like in an airport at air traffic control. So air traffic control tells all of the planes when they can take off, when they can come in, who's going here, what's going there, right? Your thalamus is the same thing. All of your senses, your smell, your taste, your touch, you know, your hearing, everything except for smell, which I think I maybe said, so cross that off, but everything except for smell, right? Vision, everything else goes into the thalamus, and the thalamus then sends it to the part of the brain, just like air traffic control would then send a plane this way or send a plane in or whatever. Okay, so it directs everything. The hypothalamus, right, it has the word thalamus in it. Hypo means little, so it's like your little thalamus. It's actually underneath the thalamus. So the thalamus is like the mom, and the hypothalamus is like the baby, okay? The hypothalamus here, you see it's right here, okay? Now the hypothalamus is responsible for the 4 F's, which is feeding, fighting, fleeing, and making love, okay? If you're not sure how that makes sense, ask a friend. It also controls the master gland, right, which is the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland is actually like inside the limbic system. It's kind of somewhere around here. Okay, you can't really see. It's kind of hidden in this picture. It's very, very, very small, and the hypothalamus actually controls the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland controls all the other glands. Okay. Also in your limbic system, you have your amygdala. That's this yellow guy over here, okay? And your amygdala is in your emotions, so fear, anger, disgust. Not really your emotions like happiness and stuff, more of the fear, the anger, the kind of negative emotions, all right? The amygdala you see is attached to the hippocampus, okay? And the hippocampus is right here, and we've already talked about that, what that does. You'll never forget if you saw a hippo on campus. So your hippocampus is your memory, okay? Now, the reason why your memory is so closely, like when you have a strong emotion, you remember it, it's because the two are connected, your emotions and your memories. Okay, so the last part of the brain that you need to know is the most complex, right? And it's really what you think of when you think of the brain. It's this squiggly part up here, okay? It's called the cerebral cortex, okay? Now, it's what separates us from animals because our cerebral cortex is larger and more complex than, let's say, a monkey or a giraffe or a bear, right? But they all have one. Okay, it has a few different parts. So it has outer layer and like major divisions, and then it has some lobes, which are more minor divisions, and then even more, it breaks down into some specialty areas. So we're going to kind of talk at those one at a time. So the first is that it breaks down into 2 hemispheres, a right and a left. Okay, your right hemisphere controls your left hand, all right? It also controls logic, language, reading, and math, okay? So your left and logic and language, they're all L's, okay? The right side, okay, controls the left hand, right? Right, left, right, okay? So the right side controls the left hand, and it's more involved in like spatial analysis, visualization, remembering faces, emotions, those kinds of things, okay? Then you have the corpus callosum, which connects the two hemispheres. So you see it's right here and right here, okay? It connects them and it allows them to talk back and forth between each other. That way your right and your left hand can move simultaneously because you're talking to each other. Okay, so then each of the hemispheres has 4 lobes. So you actually have like 8 lobes because there's a frontal lobe in the right and in the left, but it's still just one lobe, but it's divided. So the first lobe I want to talk about is the temporal. Okay, think about this. Temporal is right by your temples. Okay, it's this yellow guy right up here. Temporal temples, and it's involved in hearing and smell. Your parietal lobe is right above that, okay? Your parietal lobe is this blue guy here, okay? And what it does is it allows your body position. So am I sitting up? Am I laying down? Can I walk straight in the hallway without bumping into the walls, right? Okay, those kinds of things. And it also controls your sense of touch. The way that I remember this is when you go to scratch your head, you're gonna scratch it back here, and the way that you can feel that is your parietal lobe, and that's where your parietal lobe is, right? So temporal lobe is right here, hearing, smell, parietal lobe, ooh, itchy, scratchy, that's how I feel it. Your occipital lobe is your vision. And the way that you remember this is that we've always said, oh, you have eyes in the back of your head. That's that phrase that your parents, how did you see me? I have eyes in the back of my head, right? So your occipital lobe, sorry, is right back here, okay? And it literally is in the back of the brain, and that's where your vision is located. Last but not least is your frontal lobe, okay? Your frontal lobe is this red guy at the top here, okay? He's in the front, right? And he's involved in planning, critical thinking, initiating, executing voluntary movement. So the ability to do this is actually in the frontal lobe, okay, specifically. The way that I remember this is when you go like this, like thinking, kind of like your cognitive finger, you think, that's where your frontal lobe is. So that's where all the thinking and creativity and the planning happens, okay? Now, you have a couple of specialty areas in your brain that you need to know about, okay? There's a lot more that I'm not going to cover, but here's some of the basics, okay? So, you have your motor cortex and your sensory cortex, and then you have your Broca's and Wernicke's. Motor and sensory are in both hemispheres, right and left. Broca's and Wernicke's are only in your left, and I'll explain why in a minute. So the motor cortex is a strip of brain in the frontal lobe. It's literally like this red guy here. It looks like a little strip, okay? And it controls voluntary muscle movements. And every single muscle in your body gets a little teeny space of brain. So if you look right here, your toes get a space, ankle, knee, hip, trunk, arm, wrist, whatever. And every single little part of your body, every muscle gets a place on the brain. Sensory cortex, right, is in the parietal lobe. It's right in the front of the parietal lobe. Remember, that's your sense of touch. It measures touch, temperature, pain, okay? And just like the motor cortex, it has every part of your body mapped out on it. So when you feel, when you get a paper cut on your thumb, a different part is activated than when someone steps on your toe, okay? Every single part has a place on your brain. Okay, the Broca's area, remember I said Broca and Wernicke's, is in the left frontal lobe, okay? The Broca's is responsible for speaking or communicating. So the way I think about this is Broca is kind of like boca, and in Spanish, your boca is your mouth. So your Broca's area is what actually allows your mouth to move, okay? Your Wernicke's area is in the back of the temporal lobe, okay? And this is what allows you to actually understand written and verbal things. So your Broca's allows you to speak, and your Wernicke's allows you to understand. Boca, Broca, okay? And they're named after the guy who discovered them, okay? So if you look at this kind of little diagram here in terms of how you talk, so it goes, your eyes see it, it goes to your occipital lobe. From your occipital lobe, it goes to the Wernicke's area, which then understands the words on the page. So if you're reading something, it would understand that it said the cat is red. And then if you wanted to read it out loud in front of the class, your Broca's area would then tell your motor cortex to say the cat is red. I have no idea if that's what I said in the first place, but anyways, that's what it is, okay? So it goes visual, Wernicke's, Broca, motor cortex. All right? Broca controls speech. Wernicke's controls your ability to understand language, to read it, and to know what the words mean. All right, that's all for now, AP Psychos. Don't forget your orange for class tomorrow. And remember, psychology is flippin' awesome.